Adolf Hitler, mass murderer and one of the most feared men in history. We're going to bring to life the rise and fall of this evil dictator. I'm Jeff Douglas, and I'm on a detective hunt to uncover the facts about Hitler and pass them on to our team of special effects wizards.
Talking to me?
Meet Colin.
I can't say that.
Steve.
Chest out, please.
And Neil. Together, they will be making history. We will reconstruct 5 crucial events that shed light on Hitler's life. You will witness things that few have seen before. We're going to show you the history the cameras didn't capture. You're going to get up close and personal with one of the biggest villains of the 20th century. We know Hitler built Nazi Germany into a war machine. And we know he started World War II and triggered the Holocaust. But now, we're going to find out what propelled him forward. By examining key events in his life, we'll uncover the truth about Hitler. His story starts in the trenches of World War I. Hitler fought in the First World War and he became obsessed with Germany's defeat. But there was one incident that changed the course of his life and our history forever. How did World War I shape Hitler? The Great War from 1914 to 1918 was one of the bloodiest on record. 16 million people died. Our job is to take you back there, back to the world Hitler lived in, and recreate the moment he narrowly missed an exploding bomb. This is part of what led him to believe he was saved by God to lead Germany to greatness. Our problem is that there is no footage of his time in World War I. So what did this guy actually do in the trenches?
Richard, hi, how are you doing?
I'm here to meet Professor Richard Evans, one of the world's leading historians on Hitler.
What would Hitler's service in World War I have entailed?
Hitler was an ordinary soldier, but he was a messenger, so that was quite a dangerous job, and it involved him running from one trench to the next, as it were, carrying messages about what was going to happen next or where they'd move and so on.
To send Hitler back to World War I, we first have to find a location that can pass for the Western Front. These real wartime trenches seem ideal, but are so dilapidated that filming here would be too dangerous. So Colin plans to build his own.
Each sandbag is about that long and about that high.
German trenches were fairly well built. They were often quite deep, different stories underground, but of course continual artillery bombardment had smashed up the landscape.
We're getting some nice bits of rusty metal in to cover up some of the moss, some of the rocky bits, to make it look a bit more lived in.
There was mud everywhere, stumps of trees everywhere, not a great deal of cover.
I think we need to dirty up some of the sandbags though, they're looking a bit clean. Everyone imagines a dirty trench, so we're going to do a dirty trench.
For real soldiers, the mud in those trenches exposed them to even more danger. At times, the rain was so heavy that men and even their horses drowned. While the trench build continues, I need to go on the trail of a young Hitler. Before the First World War, Hitler was kind of a drifter on the margins of society. The war gave him a reason to live. He was thrilled to have the chance to fight for his country. The question is this: was Hitler any good as a soldier?
He was effective enough to be awarded the Iron Cross Medal for Bravery, first class.
Now, I'm surprised to hear that Hitler won a medal for bravery. He got it for delivering an important message to the front line under heavy enemy gunfire. Hopefully the actor playing our Hitler will be just as brave.
We've got our young Adolf Hitler currently digging the trench, which is, a nice 2 for 1. So he's doing well, although his tash isn't quite there yet.
When the war broke out in 1914,
Hitler was 25 years old. After only a few weeks' basic training, he was dispatched to one of the most bloody battlefields of the war, Ypres, in Belgium. Hitler had a baptism of fire, but I want to find out what daily life was really like for him. I'm in London to meet top military historian Professor Richard Overy.
At this stage of his life, in the First World War, Hitler was a pretty unprepossessing character. He had a thin face, he had a strange handlebar moustache and so on. Rather gloomy look from some of the photographs that we've seen. In fact, if you looked at him, you might think he was, somebody slightly ill. Nothing much to distinguish him really from any of the other soldiers around him. Nothing to suggest that extraordinary presence that he was able to exert in the 1930s.
Hitler wouldn't have been the only one with a pointy helmet. All of the infantry would have worn one. But the boys wanted their Hitler to stand out.
Hitler did a dangerous job on the Western Front, no doubt about that. And he did run enormous risks, because what you had to do was to take a message where it needed to be taken urgently. And you often had to do that under fire, never knowing whether that's the moment, of course, when this shell's going to drop on your head.
Deaths of messengers were so common, they were often dispatched in pairs. So if one died, the other guy could keep going.
Hold them, you're not being filmed. Only firing when the camera's on. That was good. Blow me left ear off.
Hitler would have been dispatched from a command post and carried his message via a series of trenches up to the front lines. He was with the Bavarian Reserve Infantry, mostly made up of new recruits. His comrades faced the enemy by going up and over the top.
Get right behind him.
Thanks to these green boards and some computer wizardry, the boys will eventually stitch these shots together to recreate Hitler's life in the World War I trenches, so they can climb out of a trench in Ireland and emerge in no man's land in France.
Camera down now. And action 2.
Hitler's brush with death was in the rear zone, the trenches behind no man's land. But to get the full experience, the boys want to bring the horror of the battlefield to life. No man's land was the area of ground between the opposing armies. Its width varied from over a quarter of a mile down to only a few dozen feet.
Oh, he took a hit. Okay, mate, good stuff. We're basically just capturing individual elements of soldiers to drop onto our no man's land scene, extending back from the green screen we had at the trench. Taking fire! Squad! Fire the pistol!
Hide behind something!
Thanks to the heavy artillery shelling, it was a barren wasteland full of muddy craters and rotting corpses.
Okay, and the shell's gone off. Boom! That's good. I think I might have died about 20 times already today. I plan on dying a lot more.
Many of the young men sent to the front died in no man's land, often on their very first day. Hitler took a very odd view of all this. Despite living through massacres like the Somme, he seemed to enjoy it.
Writing about the outbreak of the First World War in his infamous biography, Mein Kampf, Hitler states, and I quote, that I sank down upon my knees and thanked heaven out of the fullness of my heart for the favor of having been permitted to live in such a time. Unbelievable.
To create the bomb blast that almost killed Hitler, and without any explosives allowed on the set, the boys have to think outside the trench. Steve's ninja suit means that he can easily be cut out of the final scene in post-production. So now, he can safely push Neil forward and create a realistic force from the blast, which the boys will film later in a special effects studio.
When you ready, Neil? Okay, and cut.
First casualty of the day.
What happened, mate?
I've been kicked in the nose.
Unfortunately, the wrong one. This is about Hitler's near-death experience.
Bleeding from the
Bleeding
on the edge. Is that in shot there, Ryan?
It is remarkable that Hitler survived it all. During the first 4 days of his service at Ypres, his commander was killed. By the end of the battle, 80% of the Germans were dead.
Boom!
And as we know, in the end, Germany lost the war.
Oh my God, everything's on fire. That's great. And cut.
When he heard the news of the armistice, he tells us in Mein Kampf that this was the worst moment of his life. And immediately Hitler began to look around for explanations. His explanation was a deeply dangerous one. His explanation was that German defeat was not caused by soldiers like him. It had been the fault of all those communists and Jews in the rear areas. If it hadn't been for them, Germany would have won the war. And he kept that obsessive view, the stab in the back as it's called, all the way through to the Second World War.
Okay, turn over. A little bit of smoke.
We are recreating the blast that almost killed Hitler because surviving it played a key role in him believing he was a man of destiny.
Boom!
Basically, we've tried to recreate our trench shape, and we're going to fire a mortar down it. As always, we've painted everything green, just so that we can key it all away. Green is a graphics person's favourite colour. This is our mortar pot. This is where the magic happens. This is Steve. Steve's excited because we're making things burn today. He likes fire. And it's just a combination of cork and mothballs and various other bits of dirty stuff that's just going to fly out towards camera. Hopefully it should look the business.
Okay then. 3, 2, 1.
We've got firing debris. That is brilliant. Got some nice bounce off there. It's going to look like the debris is bouncing off the walls of the trench, which is exactly what we wanted. I'm sure it looks amazing.
Fighting in the trenches in the First World War would have been horrible, but millions of people served without turning into mass murderers afterward. But I believe that nearly getting blown to pieces would have had some effect on his psyche. Here's what we think happened on November 17th, 1914.
The German lines were under artillery fire from the French. Behind the front lines, Hitler collected a message from the command post. Moments after he left, it was hit by a French shell. The command post was completely destroyed, and almost everyone died.
He survived against all the odds. And I think rather than just thinking to himself, I'm lucky, he came increasingly to think that he'd been saved by destiny so that he would be able, in the 1920s, to work to rescue the German people.
Hitler and Germany's destiny was now sealed.
We're in our green screen studio, and we are shooting Hitler, who is not shooting him. We are filming Hitler.
And in your head burns the self-same spirit that dominates us.
This speech extract is from Hitler's Nuremberg address in 1934. It's been translated from German into English for our actor.
Dominates us.
I think the secret of Hitler's success, the way he was able to captivate people, to hold a whole crowd under his spell, is that he was a terrific actor. Everything he did was theatrical. And when he came up on the stage, he knew that he had one thing to do, and that was to play his part as successfully as possible.
Before us, Germany lies. In us, Germany marches. Behind us, Germany follows.
Cut. Scary stuff.
The boys are off to a good start, but now they need to put their Hitler in front of his audience. So I need to find out what a real rally was like. Dr. Eckhard Detzelbinger is an historian at the Documentation Center in Nuremberg.
Here was assembled and invited the whole world press, the diplomats from a lot of countries, of course, hundreds of thousands of visitors. Perhaps we would say today it was the biggest event with the superstar Hitler. These words didn't exist at this time, but the function was so.
Like these would be highly, highly theatrical productions, shock and awe, blockbusters, yeah?
Yes, of course. The combination of the architecture here by the Zeppelin Tribune with white limestone, the golden swastika on the top of the tribune, the red flags, and so on. In this combination, this was very impressive. The people in the majority were fascinated.
Hitler knew the power of branding. The swastika became his logo, and like a slick marketing campaign, it was everywhere. In order to fully capture Hitler's stage presence, our boys will have to use this infamous image.
75 years ago, this swastika was worshipped here at Nuremberg. But if I were to put this on today and walk down the street, I would be arrested. It would be an international incident. It's been banned since 1945.
I'm in the gang.
Crowd capacity of the Zeppelin Tribune was well over 150,000 people, which is a huge challenge for the boys, as there's only 3 of them.
How's that looking? Can you get us all in? We're capturing single soldiers to put in the crowd. Neil's looking like a very convincing Nazi at the moment.
By shooting each other individually and from every angle, the boys hope to create those impressive blocks of soldiers seen at the rallies.
Okay, Les, a bit more sweat. You know, when he did that real big splodge.
As well as the large crowds and banners, Colin needs to keep an eye on even the smallest detail, right down to the last drop of sweat.
As soon as the beads are on, are you ready?
During his speeches, Hitler claimed to have lost up to 5 pounds in weight and drank up to 20 bottles of water.
Okay, come have a look. And action.
All the elements are now in place. So join us as we take you back to 1934. Hitler is about to take the stage. We are making history, and this is Nuremberg as you've never seen it before.
And then there would always be this strange hush, and the audience suddenly, having spent a long time waiting for him, warmed up, suddenly sensed that the Führer was coming. And then Hitler would come out onto the stage and there'd be this storm of applause.
We want our people to remain strong. It will be hard, and you must steel yourself for it in your youth. You must hold in your fists the flags which we hoisted out of nothing. And when the great columns of our movement march victoriously through Germany today, I know that you will join those columns.
We have a lot of accounts from the 1930s of people who went to listen to him. Sometimes they went not very sympathetic, and then ending up at, after an hour of listening to Hitler, thinking, no, what an extraordinary man. It was his presence that captured people, not the quality of what he said.
Before us, Germany lies. In us, Germany marches. Behind us, Germany follows.
Nuremberg, the site of the great Führer's triumph. Today, a truck stop.
This was once the scene where Hitler cast a nation under his spell. Today, it has more humble uses. Hitler used his theatrical skills to put Germany under his spell, but he also used fear. So I've come to Terror Central.
This banal-looking building in the middle of a city block was once the Gestapo headquarters here in Cologne, Germany. And coming from its windows, you could hear, and you were meant to hear, blood-curdling screams as the officers inside got down to the nasty art of interrogation.
The Gestapo was formed in 1933 as Hitler's secret state police. When World War II ended, it wanted to remain a secret. Its officers tried to destroy all trace of their crimes, but they didn't succeed, and we were left with photos, reports, and eyewitness accounts. From this evidence, the boys will rebuild these headquarters and take you back into the secret world of the Gestapo. So how did they rule by terror? To dig out this information, I've met with Dr. Thomas Roth, an expert on the Gestapo and this old headquarters. It's now a museum that honors the victims who were imprisoned here.
So who all would have been in here? Like what kind of person, how many?
These cells were originally only approved for 2 people, but towards the end of the war they were very crowded, with 20 to 30 in here, so that people could not lie down to sleep or had to lie crammed together. Sometimes they had to sleep standing up or had to take turns to lie down.
How long would people be here?
Some people were here for 5, 6 or 7 days, but there were others who were incarcerated here for 4 to 6 weeks.
There are people here from all over Europe too. I can see all different languages. Like I've seen on the walls Italian, German, Russian, French, English.
This is an interesting inscription here. Marie Annette and Christiane. It was written by a mother who was imprisoned here while she was pregnant. She was taken out of the prison, gave birth, and was then brought back to the Gestapo cell.
At the height of Gestapo activity, there could have been as many as 50 people imprisoned in a cell like this for weeks on end. Our main challenge is going to be how to demonstrate their brutality without glamorizing it.
That's all right, that's fine.
The design challenge is to rebuild the entire Gestapo headquarters, but the boys have access to only one stage set, so they'll need to dress it differently for each scene. And, as usual, our 3 designers are doing double duty on both sides of the camera.
This is Neil having his first wet shave. Yeah. How's it going, mate? Terrifying. Just don't cut yourself.
The boys want to capture the terror of the Gestapo's interrogation activities, but without getting too graphic. To do that, they will create a frozen scene that they can add digital effects to in post-production.
It's a frozen moment. So it's all about staying as still as you can, really.
Colin also has a very cool plan to stitch all the individual shots together and to make one continuous sequence. So, the set is on stilts so the camera can track below floor level as if going to the room downstairs.
And action! Still as you can, guys. It's on you now, Neil. And cut. That looked pretty good. Good stuff, guys.
Exactly what kind of people were the Gestapo?
You must not imagine the Gestapo as mere villains or brainless thugs. They were intelligent, middle-class people, highly educated, who'd been to university.
So they weren't just looking for thugs.
They weren't just looking for thugs, no. It was these people who planned and designed most of the Gestapo's terror campaigns.
When the Gestapo started in 1933, it was only 300 people in a tiny office in Berlin. Within a decade, it had grown to 20,000 and covered the whole of Nazi Germany and beyond.
Later in the war years, when the Gestapo got larger and larger, you began to recruit a rather different person. You needed somebody, in fact, who could go out and do some pretty vicious things in occupied Europe. You needed to be able to recruit people who could go out and hunt for Jews and round them up and send them off.
Eyes closed would be good, yeah.
They would have their fingernails pulled out. They would have electrodes put on them. They were beaten by rubber truncheons, all the normal apparatus of the 1930s torturer.
The Gestapo struck terror into the heart of every German from 1933 to 1945. Protected by the state, they had a license to torture and to kill. And we are about to show them in action at the height of their power.
The real secret, I think, of the Gestapo being able to control both the German population and then to be able to spread out into occupied Europe was the fact, of course, that they relied a great deal on the assistance of the local population, on volunteers, on people who would voluntarily denounce their neighbours. And without that large network, there's no doubt that the Gestapo's work would have been very difficult to do.
The boys have created a journey through terror, and it ends here, in the basement, where subjects were tortured and awaited death. By 1944, the year before the Second World War ended, Hitler's military machine was in tatters. In desperation, he turned to fantasy rockets. So, what was Hitler's secret weapon?
At the end of the Second World War, when the Allied armies rolled into Germany, the intelligence gatherers went on a very special mission. They searched factories, hidden underground stores, they even plundered graves in search of a very curious prize.
The Allies were searching for scientific blueprints of Hitler's weapons, and they hit the jackpot. Over 6,000 tons of documents and equipment were hauled back to the US. And hidden in amongst these documents, they found details of a rocket-powered bomber so powerful, it could have reached the US without ever being refueled. The Silverbird. It could have changed the course of the war.
The Silverbird was designed to take out New York, but it was never built, and no one ever saw it fly.
But we're going to take years of top-secret research and actually build Hitler's Silverbird. Launched from this hangar, it will then go into space.
But I think the first shot of the sequence wants to be like big lock off from back here, so we get the whole hangar, so I can patch on some like maybe Nazi things.
Right.
And then we'll just have the doors opening slowly like that.
Cool.
Our graphic designers will piece together this legendary plane and finally unlock the mystery of Hitler's Silverbird.
These are the blueprints.
Yeah.
This time, we only have one extra, so Ed will be playing all the parts.
Okay, action!
Just have you in position there. Okay, now pick up one of the canisters and walk towards camera again. And turn around and take it back. I love doing this. It's better than us at acting.
The designer of the real Silverbird was Eugene Sanger, a young Austrian space pioneer who figured out how to turn science fiction into science fact. He died in 1964, but I'm off to meet a man who inherited some of his space genes. His son Hartmut is an astronautic engineer and knows all about the Silverbird.
How you doing?
Hello.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Can you describe the appearance of Silverbird as your father sort of envisioned it?
The first design was a plane like this, 28 meters long. You will see here the wingspan is 50 meters. Silverbird was estimated as a plane to reach hypersonic velocity. That means more than Mach 5.
Hartmut explained to me that the Silverbird was designed to fly on top of the Earth's atmosphere and then bounce off the denser layers of air. This cleverly uses very little fuel as it skips its way around the globe.
We skipped away in space again, returning, skipped away, so-called skipping flight.
It skipped along like a flat rock.
Like a flat stone on the sea, it skipped on the dense layers of the atmosphere.
Go with the board!
Before the boys can go skipping, they need to get their imaginary Silverbird out of this hangar.
Because we haven't got a long enough green screen, we are tracking with 2 boards that move with him so that we can lasso him and key him out.
Okay, cut.
To recreate the complex light that would bounce off the Silverbird as it sat in the hangar, the boys would have to use a piece of equipment costing hundreds of dollars. But Colin has decided to cheat.
This is our budget HDRI, which is basically giving us reference for our reflective model. You get perfect reflection of the room. But these normally cost quite a lot of money, but I managed to find this in the Christmas shop. So it's quite handy.
So, starting with the 3D skeleton of his Silverbird, Colin now knows the type of reflection to layer on top. But how does this proto-superplane launch?
It's takeoff time. I'm just going to do a couple of pans of some open fields that we're going to drop the runway on, so we can see the Silverbird going over the Bavarian mountains into the sunset, Top Gun style.
Can you describe the launch, how the Silverbird actually achieved orbit?
The Silverbird was first accelerated with a sledge, with a hot water rocket sledge, up to about 800 kilometers an hour, and then to be accelerated by its own rocket motor into space.
The Germans were big fans of using sledges to launch their weapons, just like this flying bomb. So, Colin has built a 3D sledge to launch his Silverbird.
Afterwards, it will go up to about 5,000 kilometers at that time. 5,000 kilometers, okay, we have today no plane to reach this velocity.
But what would that do, like that kind of acceleration to the pilot inside there?
We have learned today it is not so difficult. Each race car has more acceleration when drifting around a corner. For example, at a space shuttle, I think it was Saturn V, it was about 7G, but for 60 seconds it is not a real problem for the pilots.
No real problem for some people.
Okay, you have to train a little bit, you have to learn it, of course, but it can be done by humans.
I feel a bit like Darth Vader.
And the lucky human is Colin.
I can't sit down. I'm going to bend. This is the tightest thing I've ever worn. I'm wearing a period oxygen mask from World War II, the real deal. And to complete the look, we went for painting and decorating overalls, which are quite snug. Can we get a shift on here? I'm getting hot. Oh.
Colin will be putting himself into the pilot's seat for the Silverbird's maiden flight.
I'm using our cameraman's, what is this called? Hi-hat?
Hi-hat.
Yeah, the small tripod. Perfect. Let's use the steering wheel for our Nazi adventure.
The German rocket program was second to none. They designed the V2, the first long-range ballistic missile. In fact, the Allies were so impressed that when the war ended, there was a massive scramble to bring the German scientists back to the UK and the US. But the Germans' advanced technology couldn't win the war. The resources just weren't there.
The enormous cost prevented the Nazis from ever building the Silverbird, but not so our boys. They've managed to create something that Hitler could only dream about. So, after decades of speculation, I give you the Silver Bird.
The ironic thing is, the Silver Bird wasn't supposed to be a bomber. Eugene Sanger's original interest was on something greater. He dreamt of space travel.
My father hoped in his last speech that one day his silver birds will fly. And we still hope today that this will become reality, that this will become a big step in space flight.
So, we're not going to let Colin take his Silver Bird to bomb New York City as Hitler intended. This baby is going to infinity and beyond. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler's story was about to come to its dramatic conclusion. As the Allied armies rolled in to take Berlin, Hitler was deep underground contemplating his final moves. He then put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger.
Now, normally at this point, I would take you on a journey. We'd go to the spot, we'd look at the evidence, but I can't do that because there is no bunker, there is no memorial. Hitler has been erased.
This is amongst the last footage of Hitler. It was filmed shortly before he died as he decorated some Hitler Youth with the Iron Cross. He then went back to his bunker and was never seen above ground again. But how did Hitler's life really end? After the Second World War, the Russians destroyed Hitler's bunker. The boys want to take you back there and recreate his final moments. First, they need to get the location right.
I think when people hear the word bunker, what they think of is some kind of small air raid shelter and so on. Bunker is a very large and very elaborate construction. It has a lot of offices. It enables Hitler really to carry on running Germany's war effort from underground.
Structure. It had an enormously thick concrete roof to protect it from bombing raids. It had corridors and a lot of rooms for Hitler, his staff, his secretaries.
This is a kind of small underground city, if you like. It's not something which is, where Hitler is just holed up.
Colin's biggest challenge? Creating the underground aftershocks as the Allied bombs ravaged the streets of Berlin.
Today we're making contraptions and recreating the Russian artillery overhead with fish wire and a bit of sawdust. Hey! Whee! We got dust, people! We got dust!
While the boys are in the bunker, I'm on the hunt for evidence of Hitler's last moves. There's no film of his death, and only a few eyewitness statements. But there is an expert on Hitler's suicide.
Christian, how you doing? Jeff.
Hello.
Christian Goeschel is a research fellow at the University of London.
Hitler was in a very fragile mental and physical state in the bunker, in which he had been living for weeks. There was no sunlight in the bunker, and Hitler began to neglect his physical appearance. He had been known to wear very tidy uniforms. He used to be obsessed with hygiene, but members of his entourage later said, "Oh, Hitler is finally having cake crumbs on his moustache. He's trembling."
And boom!
Hitler's physical condition in the last months of his life was, according to all accounts of people who saw him, deteriorating quite rapidly. He almost certainly had Parkinson's disease. He was shaking in his left hand. He was shuffling.
He had lost control of the events, but still, Hitler was the uncontested leader of the Nazi Party and of Germany.
One of the extraordinary things about the last days in the bunker, of course, is that Hitler still thought he was commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He thought he was still moving armies around. He sent out fantastic orders which never got to anybody. But of course, German resistance had more or less collapsed. The armies were fantasies. Hitler was basically just playing some vast war game.
And action.
In Hitler's private study, above his desk, he famously had a portrait of Frederick the Great. The boys have a clever trick that will allow them to add their own in later.
Hitler looked at it very often because he thought Frederick the Great of Prussia was a German hero, how he fought the 7 Years' War.
Frederick the Great had turned things around in the 7 Years' War. Berlin had been invaded. It looked as if all was lost, but somehow then he'd managed to rescue the situation and turned out victorious.
Are you happy with the lights? More or less.
Using more of our special green board, Colin plans to confront our Hitler with a map of his defeats.
That's good. I'd probably like about a good 10 seconds of just looking at the green picture.
Before I pick up the gun?
Before you pick up the gun. Yeah. Okay. And action.
The gun we're using is a replica Walther 7.65 pistol, the exact gun found beside Hitler's body. But what happened on the 30th of April, 1945?
Okay, and cut.
Hitler's last day was a very busy day, if one can say that. Just a few hours before his death, Hitler, who had been a bachelor for all his life, married his mistress, Eva Braun. He said goodbye to his entire entourage. He gave farewell gifts to his secretaries, and these were perhaps the most macabre farewell gifts ever been given in history. Cyanide pills. Because Hitler said to his secretaries, if you fall into Soviet hands, take these cyanide pills. After he had said goodbye to his entourage, he went inside his study together with his now wife, Eva Braun. Nobody was allowed in.
I think they probably said very little to each other. I think Hitler probably handed Eva Braun the cyanide capsule. She took it, and he shot himself.
After Hitler had killed himself, hundreds, if not thousands, of Nazis throughout Germany killed themselves, ordinary Germans. This shows how central Hitler's personality was to the Third Reich. No Hitler, no Third Reich.
Hitler's 1,000-year Reich ended after only 12, with British, American, and Russian armies converging. His defeat was absolute.
Many people see suicide as essentially an aggressive act. And I think that Hitler's suicide was an aggressive act. What he was really saying was that you, the German people, have let me down. You've lost the war. I'm not responsible for this. I'm not responsible for anything. The things that have happened to me. And I'm going to kill myself, and I'm going to leave you to clear up the mess.
Hitler's rise to total power was swift and brutal. His fall was no less complete.
He was destroyed, his bunker was destroyed, his government destroyed. There is absolutely no memorial to Hitler.